Hello everybody again, and welcome to Reformed Doctrine again. In this video, I just want to have us look through what the class is going to be all about, what we're going to study together, and why I think it's incredibly important. So we'll start with a cartoon here, actually. "Dad, what if I don't go to heaven?" the little boy asks his father as they're fishing here. "Nonsense! Just believe in Jesus and you'll make it." "But say, just hypothetically, that I didn't believe and ended up in hell. Would your eternal happiness be affected by the knowledge that your son is suffering horribly in everlasting fire?" "No, son. In heaven, God wipes your memory of all the things that could possibly make you unhappy. So perfect happiness requires perfect ignorance." "Exactly. And that's why we're Christian?" Bingo. Now, sadly, unfortunately, there is that kind of sense that a lot of people have about Christians today in our culture. Maybe you've personally experienced this, or just in general, you sense this out there, that Christians are ignorant, that we're willfully, completely blind to challenges to our faith that people have presented. We're content to just sort of keep believing what we've always been taught to believe by parents, teachers, pastors. We're content to just sort of remain in our little self-imposed, safe, comfortable bubbles. Reflect on that for just a moment. Now, moving on, these are the kinds of questions, important, valuable, relevant, practical questions I hope we see this semester that we'll be exploring. So I won't read through all of them, but glance through that list a moment, and I'll single out maybe a couple that especially today are being challenged, that Christians are having disagreements over. There's been controversy inside and outside the church on. Are faith and science compatible? A big one. So I know a couple years ago, many of you in biology wrestled with different Christian approaches to evolution. Questions about Adam and Eve. What do we do with those? What is the biblical witness on homosexuality? That second one there from the bottom. Supreme Court's decision recently has caused a lot of Christians to disagree with each other on how do we read Scripture and apply and interpret those verses that discuss that subject. So all of these, not just those two, but all of these important questions, questions that have value for the way that we think and live as God's people today. At the same time, a lot of people that are a part of the church, a lot of fellow brothers and sisters, will have this kind of objection. They'll say something like this, what this cartoon illustrates. "My wife just left me, I lost my job, I need surgery, and my spirits have hit bottom. Pastor, you've got to help me. What's the difference between pre, post, and amillennialism?" Now, those three terms are basically three different interpretations of what's going to happen during the end times, as Revelation 20 records it. And the point then of this cartoon is simply this. It's kind of making fun of the idea that when real life hits us in the face, when terrible, unexpected challenges in our daily life occur that we really struggle with, do we really need to, is there any value to wrestling with these kinds of big questions about ultimate meaning? Is that really going to help me with the fact that I lost my job, or my wife just left me, or I need surgery? Okay, so there's a fair objection there maybe. We've got to make sure that these questions don't become too unattached from daily challenges and daily living. At the same time, this is something that, if I can speak personally, I have a lot of friends that have kind of gone this route. "Don't tell me about sound doctrine, you legalistic doctrine mongers," this guy is saying, as he's cutting himself off, essentially, from the firm foundation of sound doctrine, or in other words, correct teachings of the Christian faith. And so there's a lot of people today that go by the label emergent church sometimes. A lot of Christians that will say, let's just agree to disagree. We can't ever know fully the answers to some of these kinds of questions. We're always going to disagree on some ways of interpreting the Bible in these cases. So let's just focus on what matters, living as Jesus people, being his hands and feet in the world, looking after the poor and the sick and the orphan and the alien, right? Those Old Testament categories, addressing things like poverty and racism, spreading the gospel in those ways. That's more important, they'll argue. And in a way, that is what we're supposed to do as the church. Those things are absolutely important, but they have to be based on a firm foundation, or else who are we? Why are we doing this stuff? What's driving us? What are we basing this kind of behavior on? There's a lot of people in the world, a lot of wonderful people that are not Christians doing the same kind of good work for the world, making this world a better place. But at the end of the day, what are they also basing that kind of behavior on? As Christians, we need to be able to say, this is why we do what we do. This is the hope that we have for this world that is causing us to love our enemies and do these kinds of things. We need to have that kind of foundation. And so the foundation that I hope to explore more together, maybe for some of you for the first time again, worldviews, creeds, God, the Bible, creation, humanity, sin, theodicy, technical word that just means how do we justify an all-powerful, all-loving God in the face of so much evil and suffering? That's maybe a question that some of you struggle with. Election, God choosing us and we choosing, responding back to God. How do those overlap? Christ, the atonement, of course, essential questions for Christian faith. Jesus, his life, death, and resurrection. So course goals here. Describe a reformed perspective of the doctrines listed above. So reformed doctrine, of course, is the name of the class. That simply means we're going to be examining these kinds of questions and issues from a reformed standpoint. We're going to use that as our base, as our jumping off point. But that does not mean that if you do not go to a reformed church with reformed in the title at all, that your input is not going to be valued. Because number 2 is describe and evaluate different perspectives of these doctrines. So it does not matter where you go to church or if you go to church at all. Your input, your perspectives are still absolutely necessary to make this class a success. So please, please, please do not think that if you are not CRC or reformed in any sense, that your input does not belong. It does. That's part of the goal of this class, to be able to say, here's the Reformed perspective, and here are other Christian perspectives where a Catholic or a Methodist or a Lutheran or a Baptist or a Bible church member might disagree. So be able to respectfully participate in discussion, ask questions, intelligently discuss with a non-Christian these kinds of things. And then the last couple, be filled with a desire to continue to deepen your faith. I hope and pray that you don't leave this class at the end of the semester thinking, well, I've got it all figured out. I've now examined my faith personally. I know what I believe. I've got it all figured out by now. I don't have it all figured out yet. None of us do. Faith is a journey. Following Christ is a lifelong decision that takes time, that takes effort, and that is never something that is just done. So I hope that you leave here continuing to ask questions, continuing to ask yourself, what does it mean to follow Jesus today? Because I know that's something for me personally, I still have to ask myself. Grow in commitment to Christ, finally. Seek to live as his disciples here and now. Because as James 3 puts it, familiar verse maybe to some of you, faith without works is dead. Without living out our faith, it's not really faith at all. We can believe a lot of things about Jesus and the Bible and God, but if we're not practicing them, it doesn't matter, James says. So here's the way I like to look at it to sort of wrap things up. What we believe, and as we examine those, what we believe and why in this class, that's going to affect the way that we live. It's going to affect our practices as Christians. And as we practice our faith, as we live it out, as we discover what it means to follow Jesus, that in turn should lead us to continue to reflect on, okay, why am I doing what I am doing? Why am I here? What am I doing this all for? And so it's hopefully kind of a never-ending circle. What we believe influences how we practice and live our faith, and that's going to continue to go on and on in the life of faith. So that's my hope for this class, that we together examine this stuff together and seek to commit, maybe for some of you for the first time, to really living as Christ's people here and now.